Welcome into Mock Trial Masterclass, your guide to controlling the courtroom. I'm Luke and I want you to be a mock trial master. Let's talk about how you can make that happen. Today's going to be a really fun video because I'm going to go through 5 of my biggest mock trial pet peeves. I've watched a lot of mock trial competitions over the years as a participant, as a coach, as a judge, a scorer, and there are just certain things that no matter how old I get, how long I've watched these competitions, still bug me beyond imagination. And so in this video, I'm going to go over 5 of those things. Now, if I mention something that you do, don't be offended. Know that I'm doing this out of love so that you can improve and get better and cut that habit completely out of your mock trial performance. Before we hop into my top 5 mock trial pet peeves, I want to remind you that if you have any topic you want to see me cover in a future video on this channel, please leave a comment below. I love tackling the topics that you guys want to see. All right, let's hop in. Pet peeve number 1 is when an attorney on cross-examination asks a witness, "So that's a yes to my question." The reason that this is one of my pet peeves is that every single time this is done, it is so condescending to the witness. It's never like, so I'm just double checking, is that a yes to my question? It was always like this very mean and sarcastic, "So that's a yes to my question." The problem with that is that's not the attitude you want to have on cross-examination. I have no problem with being aggressive. I have no problem with being passionate and wanting to give a great performance to the jury. All of that is great, but we don't want to be mean. We don't want to be going back and forth with the witness and seeing who can dunk on the other person better. That's not what we're looking for in cross-examination. And I feel like most of the time when this question gets asked, that's what's happening. And because of it, it always makes me cringe. A much better alternative is to simply say, Ms. I appreciate the answer, but I am going to need a yes or no response. Or I'd like you to just give me a yes or no, as opposed to just, even that slight tweak makes a big difference compared to so that's a yes to my question. Huge difference. Don't do that. Pet peeve number 2 is having way too many fillers on your cross-examinations. Believe it or not, it is allowed to not end every single one of your cross questions with either correct or isn't that true. In fact, I tend to think that the best cross-examinations are the ones that don't use those fillers at all. Now, there are going to be times where you have to use those fillers. Maybe the witness is just sitting there not answering your question. You have to lean in and say, correct, isn't that true? AKA, answer my question that I'm asking you, right? But for the most part, I think you should just phrase your cross questions as statements and end there. I would much rather you say, "The sky is blue. You then went outside. You got outside at 4:30, as opposed to, "The sky's blue, correct? And then you went outside, isn't that true? And isn't it true?" You just don't need that stuff. Cut it out. Your cross-examinations will be a lot more crisp, a lot more fun, I think, for the scorers and the jury to listen to. It's just not necessary. Don't use them as crutches. You don't need to. It's a lot better without that stuff. Mock trial pet peeve for me, number 3, is an overuse of the phrase, "at this time." Again, this is like the last one. Occasionally, there are going to be times where you need to say "at this time." If you're direct examining a witness and you finish and you want to say "no further questions at this time" because you're thinking, well, maybe I'll have redirect examination questions after the cross is done. Sure, whatever. You do you there. But just overly using that phrase, it's just not a good habit to get into. "At this time, the defense offers Exhibit 3. At this time, we'd like to tender Dr. Smith as an expert. At this time, the defense calls Mike Smith to the stand." Just over and over again using that phrase is just so needless. I had a coach in college who sat us down and he said, "Okay, when you go to the drive-through window at Wendy's and they say, 'What would you like to order?' do you kind of lean back in your car and go, 'At this time, I think I'd like a number 4. And at this time," no, of course not. No one does that. Yet, for whatever reason, when we put on a suit and step in a courtroom, we use that phrase over and over and over again like it is the key to life itself. So you want to throw it in occasionally because you just feel more comfortable with it, go for it. But don't just say it for the sake of saying it and way overdo it, because that's what most mock trial attorneys do. Pet peeve number 4 is when attorneys make analogies for the burden of proof in a speech. Now, if you don't know what the burden of proof is or what that means, I have another video on the channel explaining that. But if you do know what it means, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to make an analogy for it when you're explaining it to the jury in a trial. I see this happen the most often when you're in a civil case dealing with preponderance of the evidence as the burden or the standard of proof, because I'll see teams say things like, the burden of proof in today's case is by preponderance of the evidence. That means more likely than not. Okay, we're perfectly fine at that point. But then I keep seeing these people that say, that just means 51% to 49%. Or I'll see them say, that means you just got to get the football a little past the 50-yard line. Or, we get into all these crazy examples and crazy analogies. The scales just have to tip a little bit. All of that is just so unnecessary. Now, you guys who watch this channel a lot know that I preach, make things simple, break it down for the jury. Don't talk over the jury's head. That stays here, right? That sticks. But the jury can understand what more likely than not means. Is there a bigger chance that it did happen than there is that it didn't happen? They don't need you to start talking about putting the ball past the 50-yard line. They don't need you to make scales with your hands. They don't need all these crazy, wacky examples for the burden of proof. It's just unnecessary. And honestly, most of the ones that I hear are just kind of cringy. So lay off the analogies for the burden of proof. It's not necessary. It's just not where you want to be going as an attorney in mock trial. All right, before I get into my fifth and final pet peeve of this video, I want to remind you guys that if you want to spend some time with me in a coaching appointment, I would love nothing more than to do that. I coach teams and individuals all over the country at all levels of mock trial. I've worked with middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students. I've even worked with law students as they're preparing for their mock trial competitions. If you want to spend some time with me, I'd be happy to do it, and you can get that process started by clicking the coaching link in the description on YouTube or in the show notes on podcast platforms. Fifth and final pet peeve, and I say this one for the very end because it is my absolute biggest one, not having exhibits ready to go on your direct examination. So here's the thing about direct examination. Work with me here for a second. Your direct examination is going to be mostly scripted, right? You're working with a witness who is on your team. You know the questions that are going to be asked, and you know the exhibits that you're going to put into evidence. So why in the world would you get up to do that direct examination and not have those exhibits ready to go? It completely blows my mind every single time I see that happen. Because here's the thing. If you're giving a direct examination and this happens, I'm going to give you an example. If this happened, your score is tanking. Well, Ms. Smith, would you recognize a copy of your birth certificate if I showed it to you? Ms. Smith says, yes, I would. May I approach the witness with the copy, Your Honor? Yeah. Do you know how many times I've seen that? I see that all the time in competitions, and every single time I almost have to leave the room because it makes me that upset, right? If you ever meet anyone who's been on my team before that I coach day in and day out, talk to them about how I feel about it, because if you want to set me off, that's the way to do it. Like I said, it just completely blows my mind, not only that this happens, but that it happens so often. There is such a simple solution to this. Every time you stand up to give a direct examination, have the exhibits you're going to use ready to go. There's no excuse for not doing that. You should not have to go fumbling around through binders and looking for these documents. Can't happen. Your score is going to go down the drain if it does happen. So be prepared. Don't let this occur, especially if I happen to be in the courtroom watching, because I just won't be able to handle it. So let me know in the comments, do you agree with these pet peeves? Do you hate seeing these things too? And I'd love to know, what are your mock trial pet peeves that maybe I can add to my list? I'd love to have a conversation below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.